Good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here and with this distinguished panel of guests. I'd like to introduce you to Maria Flynn, the CEO of Jobs for the Future, Commissioner Angelica Infante-Green, the Commissioner of Education in Rhode Island,
Everyone.
Assistant Secretary Amy Lloyd of the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, and last but not least, Jane Swift, the former governor of Massachusetts. What a great panel. Good morning. I'd love to kick things off right away with just a few remarks about the time that we're in. We're in an era of perhaps more skepticism about higher education than we've ever been in. Polling of Gen Z shows that the importance they place on higher education is less than that of millennials. Colleges, as Hechinger reported last year, are devoting more resources to career services, finally recognizing perhaps a bit too late that this is an important part of their work. This includes institutions in the Ivy League. And at Hechinger, we've also touched on nascent investment and growing interest in apprenticeships across all kinds of careers, including teaching and for people who are not early career workers. And it should go without saying, but I can hear my boss telling me to say that the Hechinger Report is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, and national education news outlet. So I'd like to just dive in here, and with the first question for CEO Flynn. There's long been a conflict between the pursuit of a college degree and career education. Are we at a really tangible shift in that dynamic, and is this a real moment where you think you can make change in a different way? I know Jobs for the Future has recently celebrated its 40th anniversary.
Yes, yes, I am hopeful that this truly is a moment of change, right? These are not new issues, as you said. So, I first started my career in the federal government back in 1991, so the very end of the Bush 41 administration. And, a lot of these issues were top of the list then, right? There was a report that came out that year, what does work require of schools, right? And so how can we really build these connections between school and the world of work? But I think what is different now is that we are seeing pressure coming from all sides, right? So we have Gen Z who is being very vocal about, they want different paths. They want multiple high quality options. And that is not going to go away. I think that demand is just going to increase. We're hearing employers who are saying, we need skilled talent, and we're seeing employers, including, like the Fortune 1 company like Walmart, saying, we are going to start hiring and advancing employees based on skills, not degrees, right? And we have a growing momentum then on the demand side. And we have more and more models that have strong evidence behind them, whether that's a registered apprenticeship or programs like Year Up that are giving young people opportunities in new ways. So I think, and we have a lot of bipartisan agreement on a lot of we heard Governor Youngkin this morning talking about multiple pathways and blurring the lines between work and education. Yeah. We have Democratic governors saying very similar things. We have, so I think it is a moment where we can finally start to tip the scales and really build on this growing area of consensus.
Assistant Secretary Lloyd, if I could ask you to build on that, to share some examples based on your experience, things that the department is doing and things maybe you saw in private sector before joining the agency.
Absolutely. And Cache, buenos dias. Hi, everyone. It's a joy to be with you today. And building on what Maria was just saying, this is a space where we do still agree. We do have so much common ground. And I love that it's our moment for career-connected education to shine. We are at this interesting inflection point post-pandemic where our economy is growing and thriving. We have more job openings than we have people looking for employment. And it's the pressures on our education system, on our world of work, are different than they ever have been before. And we're really considering the voice of Gen Z. I have a 17-year-old daughter myself who is continually pushing on me to think better, to do better, to be more holistic about how I'm approaching supporting all of our young people for brighter futures. And it's time to really lean into being real about multiple pathways and recognizing, I loved that Governor Youngkin said one size doesn't fit all, right? This is not a four-year college or bust nation. We know that there are incredible pathways to bright, rewarding, choice-filled, joyful futures that are in the sub-baccalaureate space. And that's why I love the work that I get to do at the department. We have three big pillars in our Raise the Bar, Lead the World vision that Secretary Cardona has set. One is around academic excellence, another is around learning conditions, which has to do with mental health and our teaching profession. And I loved that the governor again called out that we need great teachers and we need parents engaged and we need students, and that's where the magic happens. The third pillar is around creating pathways to global engagement and competitiveness. And I've never seen at the federal level us prioritize career, and I will say career and college pathways, as a guiding light for where we want to transform our nation's schools and support all students to thrive. And when I say college, I do not just mean four-year. I mean workforce credentials and certificates. I mean great apprenticeship programs. I mean our wonderful community colleges. And I feel like there's so much mythology to dispel in this space. Half of us with a four-year degree have community college backgrounds on our transcripts. I went to 2 different community colleges ourselves. I want to have us talk more about what we can do beyond a four-year degree to help young people pursue bright paths to success. So we created this initiative called Raise the Bar, Lead the World, Unlocking Career Success, which really is building on the best of career and technical education, which for decades has stood on the research and evidence base that, go figure, when young people are engaged in connecting their passion and their purpose to the world beyond, you're staying in school. They have higher attendance rates, higher graduation rates, stronger post-secondary outcomes, and they have more meaning in their learning. So we want education for all students to be more career-connected, community-engaged, and student-centered. And if I could wave a magic wand, and I loved had the prior session talking about accountability and what we measure and how that's what we end up valuing and how we design our schools, I would want to make sure that we are more accountable to providing multiple pathways for students' futures. This means dual enrollment, as the governor said, providing options for college credit earning while in high school. This means earning workforce credentials that are industry sought. There are about 1 million industry credentials out there in the world. Not all are those that employers are putting on their job descriptions as a proxy for the skills that they're seeking. What are the ones that employers really need? This means work-based learning and getting our young people out into the world of work more meaningfully while in high school. And this also means putting into the hands of students and families, parents, real information about the labor market, about their job prospects, so they can make the decisions about what they want for their next steps after high school. We are still putting stakes in the ground that a post-secondary credential is essential, but again, this does not mean four-year degree. And I feel like the discussion that we're going to have today about skills versus credentials is a really interesting one, and not a new one, frankly. But we know that skills matter, and we know that our young people are the ones saying, hey, there are more than one way to get to the life that I want. I feel like it's often we, the adults in the system, who come at it with more of a fixed mindset about what the one path to success could or should be. So I'm excited to see across the country how high schools are being redesigned around these principles, not just for students in great career and technical education programs, of course that's the foundation for a lot of this, but for all students to have more of these kinds of opportunities. So as I get to travel across the country in urban and rural places alike, we need to create more opportunities that are reverse engineered from where our labor market is, from what our employer needs, from what our states and our nation need to really grow our economy, and connect that to student purpose and meaningful learning inside and outside of the classroom. So I'd be happy to give more specific examples, but
I'm hoping we'll have more opportunity, but you offered me the perfect segue to ask Commissioner Infante-Green to talk about some of the work that you're doing in Rhode Island, specifically around changing high schools.
Yeah, so in 2019, if we could remember that far back, literally in March, we went to my board. We started working with XQRI, and what we did was an educational equity audit of our current high schools. And what that meant is that we looked at all students' transcripts, what they were taking, and we realized that half the kids in Rhode Island could not even attend our local colleges because of what they were being offered in the schools. So we quickly presented in March and went to working on our secondary regs, and we changed what it meant to go to high school in Rhode Island. What does that mean? A couple of things that were really crucial for us were, in one of the data sets, was that if you were a child of color that was from a middle class background, you were scoring or you were getting the opportunities that a child in a low income community or that didn't have resources. So what is that about? So our schools, we took a good hard look at what we were offering the students, why the students were scoring that way, and if you're in the best district, but you're a child of color, you were scoring below. So what was going on? So we started looking at our regs, and what happened was that our regs actually fed into that because there were no regulations around it. Everybody was sort of doing whatever they wanted. And we changed that. So we made sure that now our kids can go to any one of our higher eds that they're prepared. They have world languages, they have to take civics, they have to take computer science. That's a non-negotiable. They have to have a resume ready. They have to complete FAFSA. It's not the students, our schools are being held accountable for these things. Because parents were very worried, oh, so you're saying if my child doesn't do this, then they won't be able to graduate? That's not what we're saying. We're saying the school has the responsibility of getting these things done. And for us, that was really powerful because we're in an interesting place in our nation. And the last thing we put in was CTE, credential, not just taking a CTE class, right? So what does that mean? And reframing what CTE is all about was one of our biggest charges, because for many parents, it was either college or CTE. Mm-hmm. Now we're saying CTE is for everyone. You have to do this across the board. And what we started doing was working with our businesses that were saying the same things you're hearing here. We don't have the workforce. We don't have the student. And we said, okay, so help us. Let's give the kids in Rhode Island junior year apprenticeships, paid apprenticeships. You want this? Help us. We can work together. So that's something that is non-negotiable for us, is the paid apprenticeships. And we learned a lot during this exercise because what we saw from kids is exactly what you've heard here. They want other opportunities. Mm-hmm. It's not one or the other, but our job is to prepare them for both. Our job is to look for the different pathways. And what we have seen is that we have kids to engage in aquaponics. You know, there are big labs in schools where we're growing salmon. Mm-hmm. Because for some reason, our salmon has been depleted in Rhode Island in our waterways. Our kids are putting the salmon back into the waterway. That's a different kind of education. Then what are they doing this summer? They're building koi ponds. Okay, maybe, you know, not what we prepared them for, but yes, that's an industry too. The other thing that you see is that these CTE courses are very different than what we had in the past. So there's pre-engineering. There is robotics. We have kids building robots to dismantle bombs. Like, this is a different world. And our kids have to be part of that world. And what we noticed with the ones that we had in the past, kids of color were actually not in those programs. They were even being kept out of the CTE market because these were highly sought after CTE programs. And we started calling it out, and we started building new. This last year, we have increased our CTE programs by 35% in the state of Rhode Island. But who is it for? And we started looking at that and calling to question, why are there no multilingual learners in these programs? Where are the differently abled students? Where are the kids of color? So we have built that infrastructure where all means all, and we have to be honest about that. Yep. And the only way to do that is to really look at the data. The data does not lie. So I will share more specifics later, but I'm really excited. Yeah. You know, it's a new place for us. And I will say, I want to give kudos to Secretary Lloyd, because in Rhode Island, in New England, the chiefs work very closely together, all our commissioners. And 2 years ago, we launched Renew, And Renew is all the New England states, all the commissioners came together to talk about CTE, to talk about workforce, and how we were going to build that, continuously keeping the high rigorous standards and marrying those together. So Secretary Lloyd and Secretary Cardona kicked us off, and we have been working on that ever since as all of New England. So thank you.
Oh, that was a joy.
Governor Swift, if I can ask you a similar question about the efforts in your state and also the reception and how things were received, or if there was pushback or hurdles that you faced.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say what an honor it is for me to be here, and the work I've done over the span of my career. I can't think of a better place or a place I'd be more honored to talk about it. When I was in high school, I can remember one of my first political memories sitting with my dad when Ronald Reagan won his first election, and my dad was a long-suffering Republican in Massachusetts, but more importantly, had followed a track, right, to run his family, work in and run his family's plumbing company. So to be talking about these different pathways, my dad wanted to go to law school. My dad wanted to do a lot of things, but he was the oldest of 6, and his path was pretty determined. And so one of the things that growing up in a small blue-collar city, having many cousins who are still plumbers, and I always get jokes from folks of, oh my God, plumbers. And I always say to folks in rooms like this, yeah, and when you're 65 years old and you're still fixing frozen pipes, because I can still, when my phone rings in the middle of the night, I have 3 nearly grown daughters, but I still always think somebody's pipes are frozen, because those were the phones that rang in our house in the middle of the night. I think we need to be honest about how we talk about all of these things. I got into politics because of my dad, and I focused on education when I got there because I was able to leave that small blue-collar city and go to a great education institution, and found out, and I was pissed, that I wasn't as well prepared as everybody else. And when we have these conversations, they're about opportunity. They're, yes, career-connected learning, but they're about opportunity and the fact that I live a very different life, and my kids live a very different life, and my mom lives a very different life because of the 4-year degrees that all of myself and my siblings got. And I think one of the things, I love the way that you're emphasizing the breadth of opportunities in career and technical education. And as we think about these things, I don't think it has to stop at high school. And one of the things we're doing at Education at Work, which I run, is taking those students, 75% students of color at University of Texas El Paso, at Arizona State University, and they need to work just like I needed to work when I was a Pell Grant student at Trinity. It wasn't bad enough that I was educationally behind and not as prepared, and I love the earlier panel talking about closing those gaps, but I also had to work a lot more than my peers. And so what we're attempting to do is to take that need and match it with, it's really unfair to expect colleges and universities to both do the academic instruction that is necessary and keep up with the vibrancy and the velocity of change happening in the private sector to match that to the skills students need to develop. And it is also true that in the private sector, in all due respect, is not doing a great job of figuring out how to harness this talent. So when I decided to get into politics, it was because I had young cousins and I didn't want them to have the same experience as me. And then you have your own children. And my sort of North Star throughout my time in both policy and the private sector has been, if it's good enough for my kids, then that should be the policy standard I hold for others. And as my kids made their way through college, all of a sudden, these pathways from college to career are terribly broken. And it's not just higher education's fault. There are kids graduating from great universities, from public universities, and I had the advantage of having 3 kids, 2 of them transferred. So I've had every university, right? Like I've had public, I've had private, good private, bad private, you know, in the rankings, like we've done everything. And the truth is, if you don't have networks, and it doesn't have to have been your mother being governor. These folks all have networks, you all have networks, right? But my kids' friends who didn't have networks and I had a capacity limitation, who didn't get the internship, who didn't have, and COVID exacerbated it, but didn't create it. You could be a math major, and you could graduate from UMass Amherst, or you could have a computer science degree from Northwestern University, and you could end up bartending at Chili's when you graduated.
Yeah.
And Talent Disrupted, which was just released by, and it was kids who looked a lot like me when they went into college. And so we have a ton of work to do, both on the corporate end, the college end, the high school end, and the K-12 end, because it's going to ruin our country, right? The reason my dad sacrificed everything and my mom to put me through college wasn't because they wanted the bumper sticker on the car, although they loved it, right? It was what that meant and what it actually ended up doing for the life of purpose and passion I could leave, and the kinds of things that so inspired my dad from Ronald Reagan. And if we can't promise folks, and I come from Western Massachusetts, a part of Massachusetts most people don't think is Massachusetts. It looks a lot more like the middle of the country than the elite coasts. If we can't tell those parents and those kids, this is not just that generation, it's their parents, it's their grandparents, that there is a path for them to do better and do things they love, then we are fundamentally, that's when the civics issues become hard to solve.
Speaking of private industry, the U.S. economy is changing. There are more green jobs, advanced manufacturing, the Climate Corps. Is the education community responding? Is the private sector responding? Anyone who would like to take that?
Well, so I'll begin. So yes, we have, our education system is responding. So we work a lot with, we have the Governor's Workforce Board in Rhode Island. And it's higher ed, it is the workforce, and it is us. And we work with industries. So we have wind energy. That's a big thing in Rhode Island. So our kids are learning how to actually harness the wind, how they can work in industry. So those things are really happening right now because the industry has changed. We just got 100 kids that were hired by Electric Boat. That's the Navy. That's where all the submarines are built in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
But they hired them, and those kids are getting paid at a very high wage, but are also going to college. It's not one or the other. Half of them are going, they need to work to do this. So we are working with the changing industry, the climate, all the things that make sense in Rhode Island, because I will say, and nationally, but we're focused on Rhode Island first. And those are the industry that's there, that is pushing the envelope, are partners with us. They're the ones that are saying, we are going to work with the kids at all levels, whether they want to work in the corporate office, whether they want to, weld, whether they want to do sea perch, where they're going underneath the ocean and building all these things. That's what's happening in our classrooms. And it's because they have supported us that can take place.
I just want to jump in and say education is workforce development, is economic development. They have to be integral and connected to one another and interdependent on one another. And I'm really excited by the unprecedented bipartisan federal investments from Investing in America. If you're looking at the clean energy provisions of what we're doing with the Inflation Reduction Act, bipartisan infrastructure law, CHIPS and Science Act.
Yeah.
I've been talking about semiconductors for the past couple of years now. I finally went last week to Manassas, Virginia, just down the road a little bit, to visit Micron with a group of teachers from upstate New York, and also to learn from what the CTE programs in Manassas and across Virginia are doing in partnership with Micron to support our community colleges, to support our K-12 teachers and our school districts, and support our business and industry community to co-create the curricula, the supports, the learning experiences that students need to be able to enter these high-growth, high-wage, great jobs that are in demand and will only continue to grow in fields such as semiconductor manufacturing. So I can finally kind of explain how what they are and how they're made. It was very exciting to go into a clean room and get a sense of the process, but then to talk to young people who came up through apprenticeship, who came up through community colleges, who were actively finding their future in Micron, who was then paying them to go on to further educational opportunities. Like, education's no longer a one and done prospect for our young people. It is a lifelong prospect for them and for all of us now with the rapid change of technology technology, the advent of AI. Like now we need to help our young people be creative, resilient, and curious about the world so that they're always seeking additional learning, upskilling, reskilling, like that we create a system with no wrong door and no dead end for their educational opportunity that matches the opportunity in industry. So I think it takes a village to build a pathway, and it takes both business and industry and our education system to come together to co-own the responsibility of ensuring that our workforce has the skills that they need, that are really responsive to the present and to the future of what we need for our country.
To add on those great examples, I would argue that we also need to be looking at what are kind of the next generation systems that we should be building to ensure that education can be keeping pace with the rapidly changing dynamics on the labor market side, like driven by AI and so many other global forces that we're seeing. And so at JFF, we've launched a big North Star vision, which is that in 10 years, we want to see 75 million U.S. workers who face systemic barriers to advancement working in quality jobs, which is really doubling the number of those workers who are currently working in quality jobs. And we're taking a look at, if that is going to be true 10 years from now, what does that mean for our K-12 and our higher ed systems? And so we have put forward a pretty bold vision that really works on the groundwork that Amy helped to lay when she was at JFF for many years.
Full disclosure, I was at JFF for 10
Which
years.
which is called the big blur. And I love that the governor this morning talked about blurring the lines. And this is really building on, right, decades of good evidence around dual enrollment, around early college, high schools, but it's really taking it a step further to say, what if we built from scratch, a built for purpose, new governance model that combined both, targeting older adolescents and young adults, so kind of roughly that grades 11 through 14 pathway that truly centered work-based learning and career exploration at the heart of that, and that was really built on an integrated approach. Because I think at the end of the day, getting kind of legacy systems to partner at the level that we need is going to be hard. So how can we be reimagining what that could look like?
I love that folks are investing in career services. I can be a little snarky at times. I have joked after I have 3 daughters, not a tightly held secret, but I have joked that they should just use facades for the admissions tours for career services because that's the only value most of them hold, because I don't think any of my daughters on any of those 5 campuses ever stepped foot back in through career services, because the way they're telling them to do resumes is wrong. The events that they do for many of the college fairs, wrong. Those people have real internships. They are not going to the kids who walk up to the table at those college fairs. They're going to the kids who are back in their dorm room calling their parents about the highly coveted internship. And I'm sorry, but I just went through it 3 times. It's the way it works. I do think investing in career services in a way that Maria is talking about, right? To make sure that we're developing these dynamic relationships that are scalable. And I would also say to corporate America, don't repeat the same mistakes that college admissions offices did. When you have a shortage of labor, going on a college campus and making yourself the most elite hirer on that college campus, WTF. Right? Like, you're telling me you don't have enough people, but you just told 40 math majors at the college you're recruiting at, I'm sorry, we're only taking 5.
Yeah.
And then you go to folks and say, but where's all the talent?
Yep.
Like, how does that make sense? What's your program for the other 35? You must have places to put them, and I swear to God, their parents will make them go to Peoria if you don't offer them a job in New York City. And by the way, a lot of these kids don't want to live in New York City. I have one, right? At least one. So I think that it's important that as we invest in the, career-connected learning and career services, we rethink that and utilize, God forbid, those dollars more wisely and force everybody to think differently about how we make these transitions and get that kind of dynamic experience.
I love that we have an outspoken panel. So I'm going to ask another question in that vein. What do you think of the bipartisan workforce Pell proposal? And can it make a difference, and will the accountability match?
So, do you want to?
Go ahead. I'll go
So
ahead.
I would say we, at JFF, we are very much in support of the bipartisan proposal. We think that expanding Pell to cover high-quality short-term credentials is key, particularly given the labor market conditions that we're seeing currently. It's disappointing to me that it hasn't moved faster. To me, it seems very common sense. And I think that the issues around quality obviously are key to that provision. But as Amy was saying earlier, right, there's 1 million plus short-term credentials in the market right now, right? So the more that we can help workers and learners and families kind of navigate those options is critical. And I think that the short-term Pell provision can be an important step for us to get there.
Yeah. And I will say, with my official administration hat on, we look forward to working with Congress on this. From a practical standpoint, I don't know how deeply all of you are policy wonkish on the Higher Education Act and what the requirements are for Pell Grants currently. There's nothing magical about 15 weeks, right? We know that time is not even a proxy necessarily for quality. And so we know that there's an array of really strong, powerful short-term credentials that are often housed on what's called the workforce side, the non-credit side of the house in our community colleges. I would love to have a magic wand, because I would wave a wand and eliminate this non-credit versus credit divide in our community colleges and make sure that within our systems, even in our K-12 system where we're offering such workforce credentials, that they are always then the things we want good credentials to be: portable. You can take them from place to place. They're valued by multiple employers across multiple states. They're stackable. They lead to a next step credential and on-ramps into degree programs, that they're latticeable, that you don't just get stuck in one tract for one job for one company, but you can have transitions into other occupations or even other industry sectors altogether. Quality matters. We need to make sure that people who do not, there's a big opportunity cost for going to higher education: time, money, people's hearts and minds. The non-traditional student of the student who's working, as we both did in our time in higher education, or who raising a family, is now the traditional student. Like, we need to make sure that our education system works for people. And so they don't necessarily have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years to finish a post-secondary degree or credential. Let's get that starting place short-term credential, but let's make sure that it has on-ramps into further education throughout their lifetime. And let's make sure that it leaves them better off than when they started. So, we talk about return on investment. We talk about how we make sure that if I'm going to spend my time and my money and my heart and my time away from my family to pursue a short-term credential, that it gets me a better job. And that job is a good job with a career pathway, or allows me to have further education and continue to grow. Education should be opportunity, should live up to the promise of economic and social mobility. So when we think about equity, as Commissioner Infante-Green is talking about, we need to make sure that equity and quality are built throughout short-term credentials. But, oh my goodness, they play such a valuable role in our economy.
Yeah.
Governor Swift, you mentioned your perspective on career services and higher education. Is higher education evolving in other ways for the better in terms of getting people employed?
I actually am a big defender of higher education, maybe not career services, sorry. But we're working with a lot of innovative universities and colleges, and I think particularly with all the pressure, like, I served in the legislature during a lot of fiscal crises and then as governor, and a good crisis is a good thing sometimes, right? And the financial pressure on a lot of non-elite colleges and universities, where parents and other payers and individual students themselves are really pushing outcomes. I call it the big bad J-O-B outcome. I don't even call it career. So you're all going to leave here being glad you're not one of my children. That's mostly what people end up doing. But having colleges more focused on knowing what their customers are interested in, have schools doing a lot of interesting things. I would say, in addition to short-term Pell, to get the federal government to do bolder reform of work study. Mm-hmm. I scraped dishes, right, in my college when I was an undergrad. There was too many students who are still doing meaningless work study jobs. That's 15 hours of paid work that students should be able to take with them to a meaningful job. I have a daughter now who works as the assistant director of football operations at Boston College. She got that job because she could work 60 hours a week at her undergraduate institution. She was eligible for federal work study. It was not a federal work-study job. At one point, I said to her, maybe you could just ask them if they just put 15 hours, like, could you just collect your work study? Oh my God, if I do that, they're never gonna let me take that, because she was the only undergrad who ever worked in the football office. But she skipped being a lowly paid graduate assistant, got a paid job out of college. Those dollars should have been hers. They didn't belong to the university, right? Instead, she forwent using, because you can't work 60 plus 15 and graduate from Northwestern on time. Actually, a semester early, I'll brag it. But why can't students use their work study dollars to get in? And I think some schools, Arizona State, right? It's not the program they run with us. They have 11,000 jobs that they've taken their work study dollars and they're using them to be more innovative. A lot of other University of Texas, El Paso does some stuff with us, but they're guaranteeing to their students that they'll graduate with articulated skills, work-based learning, extracurriculars. They're infusing those with one-to-one counseling so that students get critical skills that they can bring with them to employers through non-academic activities. A lot of institutions, well, many institutions, some institutions, I don't know how I would categorize that, but are connecting what's happening in the classroom with what students need when they go out into the world of work. Those are the kinds of innovations that I think we're seeing that we need to see more at scale.
Yeah, I would build on Jane's point around accreditation, and I would maybe categorize this as a movement to watch, right? So I think this issue of how we are tracking and quantifying the value of higher ed, right? So whether that is looking at return on investment, like some of the work that Tony Carnevale and others have done. And then there's also a pretty interesting movement afoot on the board of one of these efforts of organizations that are really working to become federal accreditators of post-secondary institutions that are focused on economic outcomes as a key indicator. And I think that is something else that we're going to see more of versus less of, and it'll be interesting to see how the federal government responds to that movement. But I think it's definitely something for folks to keep an eye on, because I think this question of value is not going to go away.
I know we're getting close on time here, so I thought if each of you could just share sort of a bit of a parting thought, a takeaway for this group and for the audience watching online about what you'd like to see, what next steps there should be, what hasn't been imagined yet but should be happening, anything in that vein. Whoever would like to start.
So I'll start, and I'm going to look at Amy. I think one of the things that people in my role are looking forward to is really adding to our accountability system and adding the dollars where we say it matters, right? Because I think that we keep wanting innovation, we keep wanting to look at what jobs the students are going to have, how do we quantify that? But nobody has made real investments around that. We keep talking about it, and we're not, just the fact that we're having a conversation whether what's going to happen with Pell, whether that's good or not. I mean, it really says that we haven't moved that far.
Yeah.
And that's actually tragic,
Like that.
because in my state, this is really important for the kids that I work with. And one of the things that we discovered most recently when we did our secondary regs is that 46% of our students care for either a younger sibling, somebody older, that in their family. They have different types of responsibilities and have to work. 46%, they have to work. And right now what we're doing is making them choose. And guess what they're going to choose? We have to embed it in the work we're doing, because that's why we're seeing kids walk out. We saw it during the pandemic, and many of them have not come back because we're making them choose. So again, Amy, not that it's on your shoulders, but I think as a nation, we need to make a move.
Yeah.
And we have to do it with our regulations, our accountability system, and our dollars.
So I'm going to take a different tack, because it's not often, as a Massachusetts Reagan, Bush type Republican, I actually get to act and talk like a Republican. So I feel like I'm in a safe-ish space. But I would challenge the private sector. Massachusetts, we're known for leading the country on our K through 12 accountability and getting to excellence. that was pushed and led and sustained by the private sector. We need more bold thinking by the private sector on how they can lead in partnering with all levels of the education system. There are a lot of willing partners out there to do these public-private partnerships. You can't expect that everybody, and to the career services, by the way, how would you know if you've been sitting on a college campus for 5 years, 10 years, what the innovations are that are happening in your company? I would challenge you, if you're sitting within one org within a company, you have probably lost touch with what's happening in the innovation in a different part of your company. Like, innovation is happening so fast that we need the business community to step up. We need them to partner with public and private institutions to be able to provide these opportunities. There are so many students, young adults who are so hungry and will respond to these opportunities. And I would love, rather than asking government to lead the way, I would love to see the business community step up and in a scalable way lead the way in providing these work-based learning opportunities, apprenticeships, et cetera. And I think we'll have much better, quicker, scalable results.
You know, to that end, we are hosting a business Pathways Summit on June 3rd. So if any of you would like to come to the business party that I'm throwing June 3rd on the role of business and industry in career and college pathway systems, please let me know, amy.lloyd@ed.gov. Happy to have you be part of that. But I completely agree, actually, with both of you. And frankly, education is the purview of the states. Like, the federal role, we fund about 10% of education funding, and states and locals fund the vast majority, and states are in the driver's seat. We are here to provide some essential conditions, to have some formula funding, but I do believe that our role is to be in partnership with and in service to states on this front. And I love that each state across, I often call it the Dr. Seuss of states. This work is so valuable in big states, small states, rural areas, urban areas, blue states, red states, purple states. All of us are all in on this. I will say that, like, this is our moment, and if we can't reshape how young people engage in education such that there aren't having to make those decisions between, do I work to help my family stay afloat, or do I go to school? Like, students should not have to sit in rows, in desks.
That's right.
However many hours a day, however many hours a week, however many days a year. We should think about how we break up the business of schooling and provide more community-connected, work-based learning opportunities during the school day, how we value education and learning that happens outside of the classroom, how we really blur the lines between P-12, higher education, the world of work, the world of community, in ways that are authentic and really help our students learn and thrive. I want to make a very quick plug that in addition to our young people and their futures, I also oversee adult education, which I often think of as the invisible sector in our education system. We have in our country 130 million, over half of our working age adults who read below a 6th grade level. And these are our colleagues, these are our neighbors. In my case, these are my family members. And if we could upskill foundational literacy for all of us, and I'm really hopeful that AI can be a tool to help democratize access to the middle class in this way, we're also going to supercharge our workforce. So as we think about our strategies for building systems of pathways and engaging and leveraging business and industry differently, I want us to think about how we support every single young person on a strong trajectory to a choice-filled future, but also make sure that we don't forget about all of us who we need to bring along with us in that journey.
I'm going to add one more thing, because I'd be remiss if I didn't. My colleagues, all the chiefs, we're all engaged in reimagining what high school looks like across the nation.
Yeah.
And we're all working very closely to blur these lines. So this is happening right now.
Yep.
And I say that because my colleagues are all in the room, and we're actually a pretty tight group. And we have a similar vision, and this is happening as we speak. 2-3 years from now, the high school experience is going to be totally different because of the work that's happening right now. So I would be remiss if I didn't say that this is taking place as we speak, and it's moving very, very quickly and slowly at the same time, because that's how we do business, right? But it is happening, and it's very exciting. And the people that are doing this work, the chiefs across the nation, are really focused on trying to change what that high school experience is, and doing everything that we've talked about on this stage.
So I will end just by really augmenting and amplifying what has already been said. So one, I would say on both the public sector side and the private sector side, we need bigger swings, we need big, bold thinking, we need to move beyond a lot of the incremental, like, tinkering around reforms.
That's right.
I think that, like, speaking as someone who's been in the system for 3 decades, can, relate to for sure. How do we really swing for the fences, and ensure that our workers and learners have the opportunities that they deserve?
Yep.
And then I like to think about 3 F's. So how do we help young people and older adults find their path? How do we help them finance that path? And how do we help them flourish once they're on that pathway? And I think that, there is an important role for both the public and the private sector to play in that work.
Thank you all so much. What a great conversation.